So some of the lanes that I have are not always going to be the best paying lanes. Some of the lanes I have are going to be great paying lanes. But I know that in order to attract carriers, I have to have good paying lanes more often than not.
I understand that. Let's go a little bit deeper on that. I'm gonna ask you two questions here. I'd like you to address it from both perspectives. One, do you know what it costs a carrier to move a load, to move from point A to point B? I'm asking that because, again, in the online community, from carriers and from owners, I've heard them say several times, brokers have crappy rates. Don't they know what it costs to move a load? It costs out here. I hear carriers saying that. The broker acts like he don't know what it costs me to move my truck. So the first question is, do you know what it costs a carrier, an owner, to move the truck, as far as, all of their costs, their fuel cost, and their short-term stuff, which is fuel, and their long-term stuff, which would be, maintenance. Do you know that? And the second part of that question is, and you can address this from a broker's perspective at large, should the broker know / care about the carrier's cost of operation?
Okay, I'll answer that as far as I'm concerned. No, I don't know, and no, I am not concerned. I expect that the carrier knows what his costs are. I expect the carrier knows where he needs to be in order to be profitable on a particular lane, because that's his business. So I look at it like this. I'm going to mind my business, and I would expect carriers to do the same. Mind your business. When you're minding your business, you know what your costs are. When you're minding your business, you know where you need in order to be profitable in lanes. So that is you're the mind, you're the brain behind that business. You understand the numbers behind that business, and I understand the numbers behind mine. So when we come to the table, then you know where you want to be. And if you know that, then you're very likely to get closer to that number than if you don't. And I think that's what happens sometimes is, and I hear those comments. I see those comments about brokers knowing what carriers, how much overhead we got, and you don't have any overhead as compared to what I have, and I think that just how I look at that is that says, okay, I chose a different business than you. I chose a business that was more aligned with what I wanted to achieve, a business that didn't have as much overhead. You chose your business for whatever reason you chose it for. But when you make that choice, you assume the responsibilities that come with the business. And it is not my responsibility to know what the costs are for a carrier to operate. That's his responsibility. Is how I look at it.
I understand that. So, I want to ask you a little bit more about what you just now said, because again, not thinking emotionally, trying to keep it logical. When I'm hearing an owner, a carrier, a driver say brokers don't know or don't care, either one, how much our cost of operation is. Our cost of operation is, higher than theirs. They're sitting at home. They don't have all the expenses that we have. And I hear the carrier complaining about that. When I hear that, I look at that almost like a person is complaining about wintertime. It's like what I hear is a person complaining about the way things are. So you mentioned earlier that when you started off in this profession, you started off on the trucking side and the brokerage side, and after looking at both of them for a year, you chose the broker model for a particular reason. Obviously, you were looking at the numbers. So, I don't know what it takes to start brokering loads. I don't know what it costs to start a brokerage. And when I'm hearing carriers online talk about unscrupulous brokers being such a huge problem in trucking, when I'm hearing carriers and owners online saying or asserting that all of the brokers and brokerages are unscrupulous, when I hear this, again, thinking logically, I don't know what it takes to start a brokerage, okay? The first thing that comes in my mind is, well, it would make sense that if you know that as a carrier, as an owner, if you know that, people that act with integrity are lacking, if you feel that way, that's lacking on the broker side, and you're a carrier, and you've already acknowledged that the carrier has more overhead than the broker, the first thing that pops into my mind is, well, why doesn't the carrier just start a brokerage. But again, I don't know what all goes into that. And that kind of leads into what you was talking about earlier as well, as far as, drivers and owners complaining about the brokerage, the broker, but at the same time still using them. Because on one note, when they're complaining about them, they're kind of indicating that there is no value there. But every time they set a load up with the broker, they're acting as if it is value there. So if to me, it just seems that if I've identified that they're brokers that act with integrity are lacking on the broker side, not saying that they are or that they aren't, but if I feel that way as a carrier, and I know the benefit of using a broker because I always use one, I would look at just delving into that business model. Like I said, wintertime is not going to change for you just because you don't like it. You can either adjust to it or not. So speak on that for a little bit. I know that's kind of weird. You're on the broker side. I'm on the owner side. But is starting a brokerage that difficult? Why aren't there more carriers looking on that side saying, man, I'll just go over there and operate with integrity. And if there's nobody on that side operating with integrity, trucking is supply and demand, I'll attract all of the customers. How come carriers aren't doing that more so, in your opinion?
And how I see it is, I don't think it's difficult at all to start a freight broker business, right? It's a very easy business to get into, right? It's an easy startup. Trucking is not a hard startup. It's a relatively easy startup. The barrier of entry to be able to get into either of these businesses is not really difficult, right? But the day-to-day operation is something different. The day-to-day operation of a business is entirely different than saying, I want to get started, right? And one of the skill sets that's required as a broker, either you're going to acquire this skill set or you're going to be willing to learn it. And that is being a good salesperson, right? And being a salesperson is, one of the best professions in the world when you're good at it. But you have to commit and dedicate yourself over a period of time to be good at it, right? And trying to drive a truck and be a salesperson where you're going out and getting your own freight, that is a serious, serious challenge. Trying to operate two businesses at the same time is a serious challenge. It's hard enough to build one business successfully, let alone trying to build two at the same time. So it's like a monster, by itself. And then when you add that double-headed monster, I think it's even more difficult, and most people are not equipped to handle that, right? So sales is the biggest thing in freight broker. That's the biggest part of freight broker, and that's what most people don't want to do. Most people don't want to call up customers every day and be told no over and over again. They don't want to go through that process, so they give the broker that responsibility of getting freight, and they go to the freight broker and get that freight. So that's what I more so look at it as, is that easy to get into, but it's a different game to operate that successfully over time.
Yeah, I understand that. That made perfect sense. And it definitely, like you accentuated just now, sounds like a different set of skill sets. That's interesting too, because I've spoken with carriers before, and I've asked a very similar question to the one that I've just asked you. Man, if you don't like how brokers are conducting themselves and you see it as such a huge problem, why not just start, brokering loads? Why not just start a brokerage, right? If you've already acknowledged that, you feel that they make more money on the deal. So it's like, why not just do that yourself? And when I've spoken with carriers, generally speaking, what I hear is something that sounds like, I don't want to do all of that. I don't want to deal with people like that. And, it's interesting, man. I've been a truck driver now for 7 years. And again, a lot of the truckers that I deal with, they'll say things like that. Like they don't really like dealing with people. I've seen that as a benefit in certain instances of being a truck driver for the last 7 years. During the pandemic, it's like, we don't have to deal with people. You know what I mean? When all of the places started shutting down and you couldn't actually, when you're dropping off a load, you can't go in the facility during the pandemic. They got a note on the door and an envelope to drop your paperwork in right there because they're trying to, mitigate people contacting or coming in close contact with each other. So a lot of truckers saw that as beneficial. Like, we don't have to deal with people. And aside from the pandemic situation, I've heard carriers say that before. I like not having to deal with people, right? And I get that. But I've been in sales before. I was in sales for 15 years. And I remember one of my mentors in sales, he taught me, he said, money comes from people, right? And we not in, we don't want to get into religion or God or any of that stuff. We know where all your blessings come from. Got it. But every piece of money that you ever got, a person gave it to you. Every check you ever got, a person signed it. So what I'm saying is, reflecting back on that lesson that my mentor taught me in sales, it's like truckers allow themselves to get caught up in a catch-22, basically. They allow themselves to love the solitude of trucking, but I would argue that the more you're alone and the more you're not working with people, you're gonna lose the desire to deal with people. And generally speaking, I feel, being that money in fact does come from people, if you don't want to deal with people, you're kind of shutting yourself off to being able to get money, because that is where money comes from. So